So as part of that, nature has done some of that for us. That 6.5-inch rain pushed a lot of that riffle downstream a bit. Now there's got to be some shaping done to that portion of it, but also the riffle itself. If you look at that first, the pond that just adjacent to that first riffle, it's the water elevation's dropped. The riffle got pushed out, and so kind of look at it two ways, some good and some bad. One, well, we got a really good test of what a big storm will do, and everything west of there handled it really well. But that area did kind of, I'll say, it moved out. It blew out a little bit. So we're going to be bringing some additional stone in. I talked to Andy this morning. His hope is to have a crew back this week. I think it's more likely to be next week, just knowing his schedule and what he's dealing with on other projects. But he is aware of it. One of the big concerns is the water elevation has dropped in that pool area, and so there's some additional exposed bank right now. And my concern, which I expressed to him, is that's really fertile ground for some invasive species of plants to grow up, and we don't want to encourage that growth. So he's going to get out there relatively quickly on that.
I assume they're going to put heavier stone in there too?
Correct, correct. Yeah, we looked, Jason and I met this morning, and we looked out at the business park. There's still some really nice, good-sized stuff out there. So the thought is to use that material since we already have it, and move it over and move it into place. There's still some additional cleanup. He's still cleaning up the Milk Pond area, which was where his construction staging was going. He's done some of that cleanup, but it's not complete. And so there's some additional, he knows there's some additional work to do. I think we've gotten relatively close to what I call substantial completion, but there's still some ongoing items that he knows he's got to get back to. So, is that any board questions or?
So he's planning on cleaning up all of that and not leaving anything there until spring, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And the other thing I have a question for you, I did walk this after that rain, and you're right, it was incredible what that amount of water can do to a space. But at the end, where we had, after the last riffle, kind of near where the old impoundment was,
yeah,
there is a kind of a pooling area where the water is catching off to the one side and kind of just spinning out. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing per Andy Nelson, and if that additional riffle or larger stones will maybe slow that down so it wouldn't allow for that. Worried about also erosion that happens from that kind of spinning action.
Sure. Yeah, I just look and see exactly what area you're talking about. That the bank where it makes that turn to the south is extremely reinforced. So that's, if you look at it, there's good sized rock across the whole entire bank.
I think he actually is referring to the area we saw today where it's off to the side and it's eroding.
Okay. Where some of that stone kind of came to the middle and is pushing around. Yeah, that's where some of that reshaping has to happen. And he's aware of that. Yeah, we've got a big portion of the material from our riffle got pushed downstream. And it's kind of created almost like a little island area of rock. And it's pushing around and kind of eroding the edges of the bank right now. And so that has to be addressed.
Hey, Tim, John Alexander. When you say the water level has dropped, are you talking about between the last two riffles or the entire project?
Just between the last riffle. So just west of the east riffle, so I call it the first riffle, we have that pond area, which is, I think, designed to be 5 or 6 feet deep. And the water there is dropped by about 3 feet based on kind of the banks where you look at it, probably 2 to 3 feet based on my estimate today. It just moved those rocks out that were holding that pool back.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned there's some more work that needs to be done near the old dam. Mm-hmm. Is that to address the erosion you were talking about, or is there other work besides that?
Yeah, that, and as part of one of the items we had as punch list they haven't done yet, there's some additional stone we want brought in to bring some interest to that area. Some larger boulders to.
So on the north side of the stream at Highway G there, so we have that fence line. Are we going to have to extend the fence there? That, with that sidewalk going there, or because at one point there was a pretty steep drop off. I don't know. I haven't gone over there to see what it looks like.
Jason and I were talking about that a little bit today. and the pros and cons of putting a fence up there.
There is still a portion of the old concrete spillway there yet, which is, you know, we need to get that removed before I think we can make a final determination on that, because it's a pretty substantial piece of concrete and asphalt that's still there. So I think we'd want to get that out of there and then take a really good look at it and make a determination. Just a couple comments I want to add to build on Tim's comments. So the contractor has been informed there will be retainage into next year for the landscape or the condition of the restoration. So he understands we're not going to fully pay him for this because we're not completely satisfied with the job he's given us when it comes to the surface. So I just want the board to be aware of that. The other thing I want the board to be aware of is there's likely going to be additional costs due to the flooding in that riffle number one. The other riffles seem to have done well, but the east riffle, it did not do so well.
And you have to answer this now, but I'll ask anyway. You were talking about the condition of how wet it is. Obviously, we got a lot of rain, but, you know, we're gonna have rainy seasons, hopefully not that much. You know, we've talked about having trails and other park space out there. I mean, I think we need to think about in the future for some of those capital items. What does that really look like? You know, probably not just mowing a trail through there. It might be.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff where the grass is growing up and what's had an opportunity is getting relatively solid.
I actually, when we were out there walking today, I made the comment that I think we could get on part of that with the equipment we have now to do some mowing. Not the entire thing, it's certainly not ready for that, but it's definitely trending in the right direction.
Make a motion to allow Steve to ask a couple of questions, if you guys have any, to what is a representation for and someone that lives in that common area. You're good? That's where I was trying to give you an opportunity, Steve. All right, I'll reject that motion then.
I have a question in regards to the erosion that we had from the last riffle. You were talking about doing repairs on the east side by the spillway. And I just want to make sure we're aware that back in the 70s, there was a really, really bad blowout on there on the spillway in that end right there. And that we have to kind of keep that in mind, is that there were some emergency repairs and some work done on it back then in the 70s.
On the spillway itself or on the channel?
It was on pretty much right on the spillway, right between the spillway and Highway G. That's how bad the blowout was.
Okay. Yeah, that area there between G is all rock reinforced already. I think we're in pretty good shape that way.
It came through the spillway area towards the road. That's how bad it was.
Okay.
As we looked at that east riffle today, the first riffle, we're also formulating a plan to make it a little stronger than it was, you know, because I'm sure this isn't the last 6-inch rain we'll ever see. So we want to make sure we're not doing this every time.
Sorry, one other question. On the new pond on the west side there, we had talked at one point, just not knowing until it was done, what the flow rate would be there, and would we need to add some sort of water feature to stagnation? Is that, how's it looking?
It's taking on, it's actually, right now it's working really, really well. So the water wants to go in that direction, and because we want to maintain the natural channel of the flow and not have it just take all the water, we added a little diversion wing of rock to push the water around. So what's happening is the water's going past, and then it kind of falls back around, and it's just getting a nice, good flow of steady water coming through.
Even prior to the recent heavy rains, both the main channel and the pond had sufficient water in them.
I think Matt, your concern was like you didn't have duckweed, mill pond, you know, just stagnation in there.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Presentation of the biannual room tax and tourism report from Vanessa Lenz.
Hi, everybody. So I don't have a ton of visuals, and now I should have since we saw those cool dam pictures, or former dam pictures. But I can follow up with any pictures or anything you guys want. We have tons and tons of stuff. But basically this year, after COVID-19 shutdowns in 2020 and then the square construction in 2021, our main focus has been let's boost East Troy's momentum. And from a combination of private and public partnerships, East Troy has celebrated a number of successes so far. With a record number of event listings on easttroy.org, East Troy's Memorial Day weekend festivities breaking attendance records, and the return of East Troy's beloved event lineup at East Troy Village Square Park, it's clear that summer 2022 continued to turn the dial on recovery in all corners of East Troy. From the Hive Tap Room on the west end of town to Aldi's BBQ on the east end of the square in between, we've had more people and more eyes on East Troy than ever before. 2 businesses on the square, one was a retail and one was a restaurant/retail, reported 25% increases in sales. Another reported a 50% increase in sales from 2022. So the numbers, everybody that we've been talking to has been really happy. I can I'm not sure how much you want me to delve into the report. I can present it all, or if there's specific areas that you wanted me to talk about. One of the things that I believe you wanted me to highlight was the billboard campaign. So we partnered with the Village of East Troy Community Development Authority to run a digital billboard on I-43 South. It's about 0.24 miles west of Highway 100, and the promotion runtime is May 16th through October 9th. And we've had 3 different billboards circulating through that. And the first set over-delivered right off the bat. And I do have impressions for every single one, but this one I wanted to highlight. It was the very beginning and ran between May 16th and June 12th. It produced 289,762 impressions. So that was an 11.37 increase over the minimum impressions that we thought we would get. And we've just heard nothing but good things about people that are excited to travel here, and we're trying to really build on that energy while we encourage travelers to chase fall and then winter in East Troy. The room tax numbers, and I did detail it in this packet. So far we've received $17,889.67 in room tax revenue. This is a 4% increase from 2021. And so we are looking at some solid winter projections. Last year, we saw a 50% increase in room tax revenue from quarter 4 in 2021 above quarter 4 in 2020, and a 25% increase above quarter 4 in 2019. So we believe this is the result of successful targeted marketing campaigns for East Troy Lights and all of our winter activities. And we have really good high hopes for the future of winter seasons. We are going to be launching year 3 of East Troy Lights, and we are planning to go bigger and better this year. We're kind of in line with the state. I just got numbers from Travel Wisconsin. They launched or released those just at the beginning of September. And we are kind of in the front of the pack when it comes to visitor spending compared to other states. So right now, the national average is 0%, and Wisconsin is up 4%. So, obviously this is a recovery year, so 4% is incredible. Minnesota is at -5%, Illinois is at 0%, Iowa's up 2%. So, these are preliminary numbers for the state, but the trend is signaling a strong economic rebound for the industry, and East Troy is just in line with all of that. Another thing, the room tax, and I can go into detail about any of this, but the room tax comes from a tax on the hotels. And what we've really been focusing on is these novel experiences. People want one-of-a-kind events, they want unique foods, interesting stores, new adventures, and they're gonna spend their money to get them. So we're not focusing directly on, hey, stay at this hotel. We're creating this reason to stay, and we're working on giving them that reason. So, even if it's just like family and friends staying here, because it's more interesting for people to come here rather than them go there. So we're creating reasons for people to come here.
I have a question, Annette.
Yeah.
In regards to people staying at the hotel, are
Yeah.
we polling these individuals at all? Maybe putting something in their room, asking them why they're here, what they're seeing?
Yeah.
How are we getting our metrics to
So
understand why they're here?
that's something that we're gonna be working on further, because we've targeted more, we're trying to create, like, we created, for example, a downtown, sheet this summer, so it's just a, sheet showing, like, where to shop, where to eat, where to go. And so we're creating different marketing materials for different, groups. So this is like, the downtown thing is something that all the, like, shops can put on their counters, and then people can grab, because we're trying to share, like, oh, I'm shopping at, Zinn's, where can I go next? And then they can just grab this little card and then know where all the shops are. And so we're creating some marketing material specifically for those hotel, people, but it's difficult. We are trying to work with them in order to get more, clear metrics for winter, to sort of see, like, where they're coming, why they're staying. I mean, a big thing, is actually weddings. When people have weddings in town, you know, it fills a hotel. So we don't have a direct wedding venue, but, I mean, I guess we have Alpine, and the venue, but we don't have, like, a company that does wedding, you know, like a wedding planning company. So we're trying to reach out to those venues to make sure they're using, like, our catering and our flowers. That was something that we tried to connect with Alpine Valley Music Theater this year to create more of a local, relationship. So they're using our vendors, but then, I mean, like, for example, this weekend was Grizz, Friday and Saturday, so our town should be full of people eating. I mean, there's, 20,000 people just down the road. So we're trying to make sure there's ways to get that. There's a lot of different ways that people are getting their information. And so we're looking at, even like, when you have your ticket, you have those ads on the bottom, like putting ads there, for Live Nation specifically, but we can also do that for the hotel, like when they get their, itinerary? When you get your stay itinerary or your email, like putting ads digitally in there for people. There's a lot of different,
It might be good to look at the room keys
yeah.
and see if you can do a marketing blast
And
on
we're-
room keys to
we're-
different businesses.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. The other thing too is, like, we're doing this combo of digital and, like, for example, we published The Good Neighbors, and for a while, we were like, should we even keep printing this? Because newspapers, like, people weren't reading them, and now it's so, people are just have so much digital that The Good Neighbors is insanely popular. And so we're trying to do this mix of digital, so it's convenient, but then also old school things, like maybe even like welcome bags in the hotel stays for bigger, bigger things like the Alpine concerts. But there's a lot that can be done. We're doing a lot, but there's a lot of future ideas that kind of have that combo.
I'm gonna fast forward you to 2 years from now. So we're gonna have a lot of people for the RNC in Milwaukee.
Yes.
And hotel rooms are gonna be at a premium and all the way out here, or if not staying, at least coming for some events. Are you all
Definitely.
starting to think about what do we do during that? It's off the top of my head, but during that set of time.
Yeah, so when we were having the DNC here, we were kind of leveraging our relationships with our other Walworth County tourism partners, and had some lineups for hotel stays, but also getting them, like, there's branch off events, like there was one that we had kind of planned at the Trolley. So I'm sure, I mean, we have to meet and talk about it, but we're gonna leverage those partnerships as much as possible. We're trying to kind of build more of a, kind of a little tour or different things that we can present them, like as a package, like, oh, you can do this, you could do this, you could do this. But I think that works better than just one thing, and that's why East Trey's, I think, seeing so much success, especially on the squares, because you go to this one spot and there's all of these different things. So it's not like you come to one thing and then, oh, we're done. You know, we're trying to build out spending the day, and we recently featured our shops in the Good Neighbors, and it's now like, I mean, I think even 2 years ago, now we have 2 new stores, retail stores. So now there's more of that, like shop here, you know, stay here, hang out here longer. But it's been, you know, a long process, I think, to even get those things here. And now that we kind of have enough, it's easier to market and sell it out.
So what do you not have, or what do you need us? Besides just more money, like, I'm asking, because that's easy,
We're very,
to just say that.
we're very limited in resources, and I think that we do a lot for very little. So we always need additional resources, whether that be partners that want to do things or, you know, we have incredible partners right now. One of the partners we're working with, the light show, is Alpine Valley Resort, because they're already having a ton of people come into town. And so we're trying to really build on that relationship. So those kind of things, and then, you know, as much, I guess, support in whatever capacity, like not necessarily financial, but even like, we kind of work as like East Shores PR arm, so having, you know, the village does do a good job on its Instagram and stuff, but like, or Facebook, but sharing our things, cross-promoting, and we're gonna have, this year I kind of have called it like the not training wheels, but it's sort of like the bridge year to kind of get things back on target, so I'm like, we just gotta, you know, keep getting through it. But I think, you know, looking down the line, if we keep on this trajectory, we're going to be having to make decisions about larger scale things, because we're going to grow and we're going to have to partner and talk and figure out parking and, you know, it's just, but you guys have been wonderful in kind of letting us run with things and being supportive, and I think that has been incredible to this, because a lot of relationships between maybe a chamber and a village, they have like combative relationships, and we don't have that at all. It's more like free, and people can understand. Like when we did the light show, people could have been like, no, what is this, you know, because none of us knew that we could actually do it. But having a little bit of, you know, like support and faith and that kind of stuff has been great.
To look at when you do have your chamber meetings, incorporate somebody from the village,
Mm-hmm.
just to help with those next steps in any kind of partnerships. We've proven, like you said, with the billboard, that it can work well. So maybe getting involved with those meetings with you guys, so we can share the information back and forth, your needs, our needs, what we're going to do together forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more communication, the better. It actually is very helpful to have everybody on the same page and seeing what we're doing. And then, you know, when people are, and it kind of overlaps, you know, with Eileen working with people getting in the business park. It's just a whole, it all just, you know, works together.
Just have a quick question. So on the billboard campaign, you've got 289,000 impressions. What's an impression?
Okay, so they use GeoPath tracking for the impressions, and so they use like a combination. I was just looking it up too, so I could recall. They basically hire a company to track the impressions, and it's okay. They use like anonymous mobile location data, audience insights, and then they're tracking however many people are getting eyes on that billboard. But yeah.
So when you're checking your traffic on your phone, they know which billboards you're driving by.
Are we getting a new one up for?
Yeah, so we do have some fall ones,
Because we're done October,
yes.
so I think the big one is the light one.
Yes, and then we want to continue it into December with the lights, but we do have, the billboards are, I'm learning a lot about billboards, but, the concepts that we're like seeing that are really eye-catching are more, like, they don't have a lot on them, you know, so we have one that is like, it's the state, and then there's like a heart where East Troy is. There's a couple of different ones, but yeah, we don't have a ton of time left in this initial run. I think the ones, the 3 that we had have been really popular and really, great, but yeah, we do have a few additional ones to show you, but we have a light one as well.
I like the value for my money kind of guy too,
Uh-huh.
you know, like everybody is. I think if we run these in the future, they partner with bars, restaurants, businesses, and when they give somebody the check, there's something that they could fill out. How did you get here, you know? I'd like to understand how many people got here based off that billboard. Really that valuable, you know, really did this for the business area. So if we're supporting them, they could put that little paper inside of their, do huge if we do this again.
Yeah, definitely. And we are going to try to do some sort of surveying when people are using the Lights app. We're trying to integrate that in. So it's easier because they got to open it and then click through it. So it might make them answer it, but yeah. But I have a lot of anecdotal, like we've been asking a lot of people, like, when I'm at events, I'm talking to them, like, where are you from? And there's people, you know, there's our East Troy crowd, but there's people from all over.
There's
Crazy.
no lack of people, I swear. The weekends, it's crazy, you know. Trying to go in and get dinner. I was out of town last weekend, but my wife went to Oktoberfest at the Brew. It was insane. So it's definitely doing its work.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We just want to keep it going into the winter, fall and winter months. Because this is always, I mean, this has been a, you know, it's our busiest time is the summer always, and we've had a very busy summer, but we want to keep it going, which is why we created the lights, but.
Questions for Vanessa? Thank you very much, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to operating budget with financial management planning.
All right. Well, thank you guys for having me. We're here for workshop number 3, which is mainly the operating levy. So we're talking about all of our tax-supported funds when we run through this, but it is combining the capital improvement plan and the first 2 workshops that we've gone through and identifying what's our future levy needs immediately for 2023. And then, as you may recall from this process, we do launch 5 years into the future. Just because today's decisions affect tomorrow's dollars. So with that said, I'll kind of go into the objectives in that we do look backwards as well. We'd like to look at the historical trends just to understand where some of the operating expenses have been. We like to look at this long-range forecast to make sure we see how these puzzle pieces fit together. I have a slide on this later, but ultimately the general fund, the capital improvement fund, as well as the other tax-supported funds are subject to levy limits, whereas your debt service is not subject to levy limits. It can be imperative to understand if we are funding a capital improvement with cash, we may be limiting ourselves in the operating budget or vice versa. So with that said, we like to kind of illustrate these items in terms of this 5-year plan. We like to look at certain assessments. You're a rated entity, so certainly you have external eyes on the finances of the village and where you're going. This provides a good guiding path in terms of future decisions for the village, and Moody's has, identified how valuable that can be in terms of understanding their credit assessment on the village. And then finally, kind of provide that framework for the 2023 budget so that you can make certain educated decisions. Some of the positives that we found going through this analysis is that the general fund unassigned balance went up. So if you were to look at your 2021 financial statements, you would notice that that unassigned fund balance is about 45% of your operating revenues. The village's policy is 35%, and then the Moody's credit score just knows anything greater than 30%. So that's a good place to be at. I have a chart on it later in the presentation. You can kind of see that trend. That said, you can certainly make a decision in terms of what to do with any excess funds, as I know it's kind of the village's policy to do so, as mentioned here. In addition to that, another financial positive would be TID 3 closing this year. You adopted a resolution earlier in 2022. As a part of a TID closure, you get 50% of the percentage of your increment value that's added to the tax roll. So that said, it provides you additional capacity under levy limits. So you're allowed to increase your levy in order to pay for the additional growth that's happened. So you may have additional services as a result of the growth that's happened, and ultimately the state allows for an increase to your allowable levy limit as a result of the closure. The biggest thing I'll note here, you guys are going to use it, but it is a use it or lose it. It's base building. So basically you want to claim and actually levy for this addition here if you want to conversely drop the debt service levy in the year that you claim it. You can do so on your line E adjustment. That said, we do see communities miss this and then kind of have to go ask the DOR for it back. So that said, there's a lot of provisions in order to do so. I'm not going to get into that, but use it or lose it is the message there. In terms of financial challenges, this does not change from year to year. Ultimately, you're subject to levy limits and net new construction. I'll get into what I mean by that on a future slide. And then also general obligation borrowing capacity. We have a chart on this later. Ultimately, you're subject to 5% of your total value. You can only have 5% in GO principal outstanding. However, you can annually have debt service at whatever you want. Like I said, that is not subject to levy limits. So actually, you can have a payment be whatever you'd like. However, of course, that affects your tax rate. Looking at fund balance, I provide 2 slides here as more of reference points. I'm not going to spend and walk through each of these. Just know that you ultimately have different components of your fund balance. The biggest one being that unassigned. There's external optics on that. Your policy guides what you're doing with that. Assigned is basically things you've dedicated for future projects. So I'm not going to spend any more time on this slide. On that is more reference material for you. And certainly if you have questions on what you have been doing or what you are doing with that, we can go into that in further detail. On the next slide, this kind of just defines certainly what you can use the fund balance for, and ultimately, this stands to reason in terms of if you have excess cash in terms of your own personal budgets, kind of what you're looking to do with that money in the bank. So that said, kind of no different here. Ultimately, just know that the rating agency wants you to have a certain limit so that you can kind of pay for those unforeseen events. This is imperative as COVID hit, and certainly there were some revenue delays and other sales tax revenues for those that rely on sales tax. But that said, just understand the listing here of important uses of fund balance. Ultimately, too, one of the not recognized approach to unused fund balance, too, is kind of that tax rate stabilization, right? So if you want to decide instead of issuing, we can use some of these unassigned fund balances to downsize debt or pay off debt, can be an important tool to kind of keep your tax rate level. So again, this is a 5-year look back into the general fund balance. The most important items here is just looking at how you track in the orange bar and then the 2 lines. Again, those are 2 targets in terms of where your unassigned balance should be, and you've been above that. So kind of all good news there. What you'll see in 2021 is ultimately still the undetermined portion, or that 45% to that 35% target there. Now kind of, sure.
On that general fund balance, and again, Matt is light years ahead of me in figuring all this stuff out, but fortunately, I still have to ask the question. Why is the unassigned dropped from 2018?
I believe, off the cuff right now, we have done, when those unassigned balances high, we will transfer it to capital and use it for capital. That's the best use of funds, not to support.
Okay.
I would have to verify that.
I understand.
But when there is a drop, that's
it was
typically
just
what
something I
indicates.
noticed looking at the graph, and and not being educated in this kind of stuff as other people may be. But the other question I would have is why the 6-fold increase in non-expendable? Non-expendable? I don't know what the hard to read. Non-spendable.
I believe that's going to reflect the utility loan. I believe we did a general funded utility loan that's being paid back, so that would be non-spendable.
That's correct. Kind of going into levy limits, the basic math that in terms of what your cap is, so when we're building an operating budget of what you can't go over, is essentially whatever you use or tax for last year may be increased by a percentage that is net new construction. So you don't get the benefit of economic appreciation. So the existing structures gaining value don't give you a benefit in terms of increased tax, but it's net new construction. And so we'll have a couple of graphs that kind of show what that is. Just again, there's also numerous adjustments you can make that aren't, subject, that allow you to increase the levy, such as debt service. That's the main one that the village utilizes. This is a history of the value of the village in terms of equalized value, and then that net new construction change. The net new construction is the line that would attach to the percentages on the right-hand side. The values are the bars on the left-hand side. The main story here is that you've seen some good growth with net new construction kind of being around 1% and a little under 1% of late. So on the next page, it kind of shows you what that's been able to provide, which isn't a lot. So looking at the 1% or just under 1%, it's about $20,000 and under. CPI has been a lot more than that. This is a problem for a lot of communities in terms of how do we maintain our operating budget with the limited flexibility that we have. You have the benefit of the TID 3 closure in terms of this year and additional operating expenses that you're putting into the budget. But that said, you can see where if this is, a TID closure doesn't happen every year. And also we're relying on net new construction as our only parameter to increase our operating budget. What other vehicles do we have for us? And we go into this, but again, this is something that shows the importance in terms of looking 5 years ahead and understanding if we keep on this trend, what are we able to budget for against, an expense trend? So ultimately, this is kind of showing the historical approach, and then we'll kind of get into what we're finding in terms of the future.
So I just have one comment. I'd
Sure.
love to simplify it for people like me and 40. Okay. Basically, it was $20,000 extra we could bring into this community
Mm-hmm.
to help pay for increase in our health insurance, increase in wages to each any one of our employees that want it, increase the amount of employees that we need in this community. Any road projects that came up, any mains that may have broken throughout the year, we had an extra $20,000 to take care of every bit of that, right?
Right.
Okay, just to
Yep.
clarify, thank
Yep.
you.
Doing a lot with a little. So again, this is just the slide that I referenced earlier in saying just understand that GO debt service is not subject to levy limits, but any of those tax-supported funds are. So as we're building the future plan, you know, and pivoting, it's ultimately kind of a solve for where's our ceiling at in terms of levy limits, and then what can we do with those future budgets. So going further into that methodology on the next slide, you know, we keep those non-levy sources of revenue flat, basically saying, all right, if all these government aids, fines and forfeitures, other sources of revenue, if we keep those flat and we have a certain, you know, different categories of expenses that we increase by X%, and we have a slide on that, ultimately, what's the solve in terms of expenses minus those non-levy supports to get to our allowable levy each year? And again, you know, you end up hitting that ceiling pretty quick. And then the final component of that being, we'll take care of all of the tax-supported funds up to capital. The one being capital, we can move that and basically say we can defer projects before we can hire one less person, you know, or have one less person on staff. So just understand kind of a little bit of how the sausage is made there. And then the big note here is that, again, that TID 3 closure, adding $100,000 into the base levy is a huge step, because that provides kind of a launching point into the future. So I think that's a positive. Outside of, you'll see later, there's actually a cash flow positive as well from closing the TID. So here's where we kind of get into the expense projections in terms of what we're doing when we categorize the line item expenses. You'll see in the administrator's report, in terms of all of these budgets, you have you know, a multitude of line items in terms of each of these funds that you hold. We then categorize them, apply that to the 5-year in terms of what our annual inflation would be. Again, we can run what-if scenarios at your discretion in terms of if you'd like to see varying expenses. For the time being, based on our discussion with staff, we found these appropriate in terms of launching point into the 5-year plan. I think these are fair. You recently, you know, went through certain studies and things to identify what for the 2023 budget where you should be at. So I think that it was kind of a good amalgam of events that happened to kind of get to the point that we're at, and the TID 3 closure helping support a lot of those increases in expenses. In terms of the general fund summary, and again, I'm just going to focus on the 2023 budget. Probably could have cut off the rest because I get into that later. But that said, where we land in terms of, you know, that solve, right, we're taking our expenditures just over $3 million against our non-levy revenues, and then finding where our levy lands in terms of what needs to support the general fund expenditures, came to that $1.7 million. I'll note this isn't balanced because you ended up adding a line that I didn't have in the model of intergovernmental. That's at $7,800. So if you're noticing a small difference there, it's ultimately due to that line item not being in this one. So
I have a question in that regard. And again, you probably answered it and it went about 3 feet over my head. But I'm looking at the estimated for general fund revenues. And when you, the second column, is it estimated for 2022?
Mm-hmm.
And it's at 4% higher than the estimate from 2021. But then you go over to budget for 2023 and we're 8.5% up. And I guess my question is, why are we jumping up 4.5%?
I can take that one. The largest contributors, well, first of all, we got that extra levy from the TIG closure, which is ultimately going to the general fund. Of that levy, the breakdown is about 70-some thousand went to operational increases for the fire rescue department, and 40-some thousand went towards the budgeted wage increases.
So
Thank
40,
you.
are you asking why the first line went from 1.57 to 1. So 100,000 of that? 3.
I wasn't sure, and that's why I had to ask.
Then I'll kind of get into the projected later, as I said. So another valuable aspect of this is you also get a state aid if you can restrain your expenditures, as they say. And so what that ends up being is looking at what your net new construction is. You get a certain percentage of that to increase, and then they also allow you to increase, and this is budget to budget, by the forecasted CPI. And ultimately, with increasing CPI, the expenditure restraint program kind of expands, right? So this allows communities to increase expenses. Why levy limits don't follow this, don't ask me, talk to your legislators. But that said, it's actually the timing of it, as Eileen and I talked, is kind of crazy when you think that you're allowed to actually use this TID 3 increase and not, a prior year CPI increase may have penalized you in this regard. But seeing that you have, an allowable increase in terms of 7.7% for CPI, it's good to know that you'll still qualify for that expenditure restraint program payment in 2024. So beyond that, we like to project out into the future again, and we're not going to just say that this, the CPI will continue at its current rate. So we did go a little conservative. Under that assumption, you'd still be qualifying for this. Decisions you make in terms of the budget to budget can be important, and we know that village staff analyzes this, but it's just important to know as we look at those expenditure increases and those percentages on the previous, about 2 slides ago, are we still qualifying for the state aid?
The old carrot on the stick from the state.
It's one of those baby carrots. And just the quick trip pack, right? Yeah. In terms of, again, we're putting all the puzzle pieces together, and I know this is a lot of information, but again, this is more for reference in terms of if you're trying to dial down and understand. You'll see on a later slide, for example, that the levy actually goes down in 2027 and 2028, although you may have seen we're always showing an increase for the general fund, the biggest levy component. The reason for that is kind of what we have slated for the next 5 years of capital in terms of we've structured in 2028 the debt service levy to drop by 60,000. So that's the drop you'll see in the kind of 5-year projection. Ultimately, that you could say, well, that'll probably be plugged with other capital if we're looking at a 5-year plan 3 years from now. So just wanted to point that out, though. It's fun to connect the dots, I'm sure. But that said, this is the structure in terms of the first 2 workshops looking at the capital improvement plan. We're trying to manage that tax rate for debt service, try to keep that as level as possible, and as well as structure the debt so that we're not increasing the debt service levy by that much either. So again, just another, you've already seen this in terms of the first 2 workshops. again, another slide just on that, we talked about what your borrowing capacity is. The village, as I set forth kind of that goal for 50%, again, and, under our capital plan that we're under that with some residual capacity, as well. So, again, kind of a repeat from the first two sessions, but does connect to this one. In terms of the utility debt service summary, as part of the final report, you'll see our 10-year cash flows for the utilities. And just wanted to include this slide on capital as going through the 2023 budgets, and in terms of what kind of navigable routes do you have for rate setting. The couple of points that I would make here is that in terms of, I'll tackle sewer first, which is on the right. We look at your existing debt and then the proposed debt from the capital improvement plan in 2021 in terms of net revenues. So this is cash available after you've paid your cash expenses, so rate revenues against cash expenses. You have, the $900,000. You'll be able to fund the capital improvement plan with an additional capacity kind of starting in 2028. So that said, if there's large, treatment plant projects upcoming or other large sewer projects, the sewer utility is set up to pay, for those in a couple of years. So that said, kind of good news there. You will have limited margins on the first couple of years. There's still a decent amount of debt service capacity. Think of that in order to kind of pay for those fluctuating and volatile maintenance expenses. When it comes to the water utility, we were thinner, and we talked about this in the first two workshops. One of the avenues that you'd have available should you want to adjust rates is you are eligible for a simplified rate increase. That eligibility is based on your 2021 PSC annual report, and what that provides you is a 4.5% increase to public fire protection charges and general service charges. So those are the fixed charge that you'll see on your personal bills if you pay a water utility bill, and then the volumetric charge ultimately. So that provides about an additional $38,000 of total revenue. So might help kind of make this initially look prettier, as we still have some existing debt to take care of for the water utility, as you see there, through 2026. And again, on the final report, you'll see our 10-year cash flow in which we identify rate adjustments, recommended rate adjustments for the next 10 years. But if the village was inclined, just know you are eligible for that simplified. In terms of the multi-year budget forecast, just know we're kind of all-encompassing here. We're just providing that fact, and that we're making sure we're putting all the pieces together here. So on the next slide, kind of looking at what this all means, we'll see the increase in terms of the percentage change to total levy, that is the line, and then our levy components are the various levels of sediment here. So that said, we are slowly increasing this levy up until we do have kind of that drop in debt service in 2027 and 2028. So that said, all in all, kind of with the plan in terms of where we're putting expenditures, this is fundable. That said, if you want to see certain other what-if scenarios of additional services, things like that, we could plug that in and kind of show what that looks like or what may be needed.
Why the spike in 23?
Again, kind of the same answer that Eileen gave in terms of the additional 70,000 and then the additional 40,000, but ultimately you're using that TID 3 allowable levy adjustment for certain expenditures. This is just a numerical representation of what was shown previously in terms of the top part of this slide. The rest is how that looks in terms of a tax rate. So again, as your values increase, we're trying to kind of maintain with, the current tax rate. And again, that insertion in terms of, getting your TID, tax roll to the TID out, is a huge help in terms of following that, lowering that tax rate. So ultimately, we're able to increase expenses while decrease, the tax rate. So a huge win in terms of the success of TID 3 and what that means for the village. And I just kind of broke down in terms of that increase, so this might help answer some of this question. But where we saw the levy increases for the 2023 budget, and then I think you'd have to kind of drill down to the line-by-line items, as Eileen highlighted earlier to answer your question in terms of those increases. But these were the to get to the total $137,000 increase, ultimately where that came out. So again, we just want to highlight some of the budgeting tools that we, talk about in terms of where we go when we're trying to build this plan. And ultimately, if any of these are more supposed to be visual cues for the board to kind of say, if these are things you'd like to see, forward that on to village staff. We can certainly build certain scenarios for new services, et cetera. And then if there's certain prioritization levels of, we don't want our tax rate for debt service to go that high, to let us know, and we can reprioritize those projects, things like that. So in terms of the levy limit strategies, so let's say we're running into a scenario where we want to increase, or we have further increases for emergency services, or we have some capital that we would rather not issue debt for. What a lot of communities will do is you can use your debt service adjustment and issue short-term notes in order to kind of get to that point, and pay for those one-off expenditures. And basically you're saying, hey, we need an allowable levy increase for this year, and then you ultimately pay off that short-term note at the point at which you receive those taxes. So that can be a short-term financing method to get past levy limits and pay for kind of smaller capital items that may be one-time in nature. And also, if you have items that are ongoing in nature, what a lot of communities are doing are going out to referendum. So you have the ability to go out for a levy limit referendum that basically says, for example, I'm doing one in another community that just passed a week ago. They're adding 2 police officers. They want an additional $100,000. And so they're basically asking their constituents, can we exceed our levy limits by $100,000 on an ongoing basis in order to hire these 2 officers? So that's the question they're putting on the November ballot. So I kind of provide the next 2 slides to just add that context in terms of what are the questions that we should be asking ourselves if we're hitting that levy limit ceiling, and then some language examples should the village find itself in kind of wanting to go out to referendum to increase its levy limit. And then the last component of this are the TID summaries, and we're looking at TID 3 that closed. You were provided some additional levy limit capacity, and as well as that closure in terms of cumulative fund balance. You now have $193,000 that will be refunded to the village. So again, another decision point in terms of where you want those dollars to go to. And then for TID 4, we're just seeing a good interest in development in 2022, which is good news, and we have the cash flow on the following page. So that's looking to close kind of down the road in order to execute all the projects in its project plan in around 2034. Beyond that, I will try to take no more of your time unless you have certain questions or want to discuss anything. It's involved, but...
Any questions from anyone?
How serious do you guys hear the talk of levy limit restrictions being lifted for public? Talked about the referendum for services district. We had a Troy meeting on that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really serious in the next couple of years, or is that just talk?
So we've seen a few legislators put it on, it just hasn't gone very far. So I would say not very serious to date. It'll be interesting to see what happens in November, because sometimes the reshuffling tends to put past initiatives under the rug, and then all of a sudden they'll kind of resurface. So it all kind of depends on, I think, what happens in November, and then we'll probably know more come February as we get into the legislative session.
And back to the Tri-Troy, we learned anything more about, conversations with the county about what happens with the library?
I have a meeting with, Rick Stacy, Mark, County Administrator, next Monday. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it.
I just had one other item here. I thought, and this, the memorandum we had here about some of the, police and some of the administration and things, and on the back page here, they were talking about direction to staff. One of the questions was, how are the board's iPads functioning? And mine's perfect, so.
I think you need one, Flordy.
Put together some kind of resolution that it's mandatory that all board members utilize, because it's too tasking on the staff to continue to print all that, sorry. Anyhow, moving on for, consideration of change order for...
Not so quick, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I know you guys love the
Staff
budget.
they do need direction.
I know you guys love the budget topic, but, there were some questions, and I did want to point out today, I noticed, I think I might have to make a modification to the capital for emergency services. I was reviewing it just before I walked out the door, and I had made a change on Friday that I think was incorrect. So you will see the budget document one more time, because, we do need to be sending the notice for the public notice by 10th. And as I mentioned in my memo, I will not be at your next meeting, so Kathy from our office is attending this meeting. I know you guys don't get to see her on a regular basis, but she's available to attend that meeting if you do need somebody from our office to attend it. I will not review my whole memo because I'm hoping that you read it, but I do have questions for you that I did under that direction to staff, board decisions, a couple of questions I asked. And I noted in my memo that I do have about $7,000 in contingency. We have a couple options for that. Pending the results of the salary study, we might want to leave it in contingency and then reassign it with a budget amendment later on. But, so right now, we don't have funds available for these questions per se, but I do need direction on them regardless, because then we need to figure out how we're going to fund them. The first is the Lions Club has asked the board to support the fireworks during the prior 2 years, which the board did do. Those were not budgeted for. Do we want something incorporated in the budget for 2023?
Good. I think likely going to be a request continuing on. This two-time it's done.
I agree, but I'd also like to see how we can facilitate conversations between the chamber and Lions Club, see what. But for 2023, I would say.
Okay. I did ask the question about the iPads. I think it's worked very well at the board level, and I will say it's significantly reduced our paper usage, like really noticeably, and reduced the amount of space we need in our copy room, believe it or not. So I eventually would like to transition the Plan Commission to that same system. I have not discussed it with them. Total cost is about $1,850, and I don't have it in this year's. I can put it into next year's, but I wanted to throw it out there, see if the board's agreeable to that, and also get a feel for how your iPads are functioning. Some of the iPads have been floating around for a while. Are there any concerns with the current iPads?
I think mine is one of the older ones. I'll let you know as soon as they
Okay.
updates.
Last meeting what happened, but, yeah.
You had
completely
that one problem.
glitched out. I had to restart.
Been
I don't know if
fine
that's a
since.
one-time event, but as far as iPads for the planning commission, I think that it's essential. Every one of the neighboring municipalities around us is so impressed with us walking into our meetings with the iPads and understanding how much less that has to task anybody that's in administration to do anything. It makes sense to do that next step. That's where everybody's at. We're all trying to go paperless, and great for me.
Yeah, they've worked really well, and really the Plan Commission's packets are still being hand-delivered to homes. So, you know, somebody from staff is going around and delivering them, so that would be a nice change. So I'll see how we can incorporate that. And then I do question that the last update to board salaries was in 2013. An update could be adopted, but they don't take effect until new terms of office are elected. Does the board want any review of that or not at this time?
One thing I would just advise the board on is that the neighboring, not that we need an increase category anyhow, but the neighboring communities are higher than us. Out of East Troy, less meetings.
And the financial pressures we're under. I agree with your comment.
Would you mind restating that, please? I couldn't hear that at all. It was cutting in and out.
I agree with Scott's comment, and it's interesting. I'm taking a leadership class. When I hear something, I'm supposed to say, that's interesting. That's interesting, Scott. But I would not change, I wouldn't change it.
I agree. And my iPad works fine, and that is very interesting.
I would accelerate the iPads for everyone else because we'll have the new meeting room with the new technology, so there may be more, you know, sharing of what I'm looking at up.
That's helpful. So we'll incorporate those changes, and I'll update the emergency services capital. You will get the revised budget for one more review on October 3rd. Kathy is available to attend that meeting if we need her to, and then if there are no further questions on it, we can go ahead and.
One other question, another you had identified September being preliminary for the study on the wages.
Yes.
And when's the final going to commit for that?
I'll have something in October to review with the board.
Consideration of change order for a multi-use trail on Highway 120. Any questions about Jason's memo on that?
Make a motion to approve change order 2.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. How about consideration of change order for microsurfacing project? Any questions on that?
Motion to approve change order 1 for the micro surf.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Consideration of Highway 20 streetlight relocation. About that memo.
Just briefly, early in design with this project, we had gone to DOT and asked if they had any planned upgrades for street lighting in this corridor with this project. And the answer was no, so nothing was budgeted for street lighting in our 2022 budget. So we don't have funds currently set aside to do this. But what prompted it is essentially the curb and gutter in that area with some conflicts. So that's why we're looking at this now. I did take a look at the design they sent back, and I feel like there's a little bit of room for improvement. I would say we want to at least add one more street light at the new crosswalk, which is going to be at North Sterling and Highway 20. Unfortunately, I have not heard back from them. I was hoping to hear back by this meeting to have that number, because the number, the 8567 in front of you, does not include what I had proposed to them. So don't know if the board wants to table this, or if you want to approve me up to a dollar amount, or how you want to move forward with that. I do know they want to try to get this work done yet this fall, ahead of construction.
Do you remember what the cost was for the extra lighting when we had a citizen asking for it in the Brook?
So we installed a street light at the intersection of Town Line and Highway 20. This is a few years back, but that was $2,500. There was no pole, no anything, so just to give you an idea.
So about a $15,000 mark on this, is that gonna be
I would say
close?
that that's more than enough, to add, potentially the one pole I'm looking at, and if they come back with any other design changes that they propose.
Make a motion to authorize DPW up to $15,000 on streetlight relocation for Highway 20.
I'll second that.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Carries. So, what's going on with PFAS? Does anybody have any questions for Jason?
Remind me, where is well 8? I have not memorized our well locations.
So well 8 is, up on Highway 20. It would be just east of the, soccer fields.
But did it take the place of 5?
No, so we currently have 4 wells, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Wells 6 and 8 are adjacent to Highway 20, and those are both the wells that had the D-Tex in them. So you're going to hear more and more about PFAS. You're probably already hearing more about it, because now it is required to test it. And so we will be testing again. So if you remember, we did some voluntary testing in spring of this year, and these are the results that we just got back. And since then, it has become mandatory testing. So all municipal water systems within our state and multiple other states will be testing for this. Eventually, it's going to be nationwide. And the levels that you're looking at, these are recommended. They're recommendations from the Department of Health Services for the state of Wisconsin. So while these are the current recommendations, EPA has not come down with their final recommendations or their final limits yet. Supposedly that will be by the end of 22. There's some rumblings that there may be ultra-low limits proposed and adopted, lower than the limits we're looking at here. In a nutshell, what we're looking at here, the two that we need to be concerned about are the well 8 D-Tex, because they're above the prevention action limit, but they're below the maximum containment level. Right now, the MCL, the MCL is what we need to stay below. If we go above that, that's when we need a corrective action plan. It could mean well 8 is no longer usable. It just depends on what those final limits are set at, and that's what we won't know till the end of probably 22.
What's the depth of well 8?
Well 8 it's a shallower well. I think it's 110. Well 8 and 6 are similar. That's, and we did get a detect in 6 as well. Again, they're near each other, same aquifer. So the good news about it, if you will, if you want to call it good news, is well 8's our lowest producing well. Unfortunately, it's also our newest well. But it's just going to really depend on what those final limits are set, and then what our action is after that.
I know there's a recommendation to send a letter out. Is there, filters, that anybody recommends that in their homes, to potentially remove these?
So PFAS compounds, the molecules by nature are very slippery, right? So they're used in the nonstick cookingware, in the fast food, wrappers, those sorts of things. So they're tough to remove. And this is also new, so the technology hasn't really caught up to it yet. The problem with the removal is then you have a byproduct, right? So because you can't break these molecules down, you can only remove them. But then you have them, then you have a byproduct, and then you have to dispose of that. And where, of course, does that end up? In the sanitary sewer, or in landfills or whatever. So the technology isn't quite caught up to the problem yet, if you will. So, when those new limits come out, my plan would be, so we're actually due for a water system analysis. Anyway, we had planned on starting that in 22, but now in light of this, I think we need to hold off on all that until we find out where exactly we stand with PFAS, and then we'll work with Strand, who's the consultant that we use for the water utility, and try to figure out what the path forward is. But until we know what the rules are, we really can't formulate a plan.
So I had seen an article about this a few weeks ago. I just found it again. So about the only way you can break them down is to incinerate them at 1,800 degrees. So they have figured out how to break some of them down. Obviously, it's in a lab, so they haven't scaled it up. And it's not all the different types, as you can see. The challenge is the carbon-fluorine bond. For this well, since in the aquifer, we have an idea of like what the contamination source was?
Really tough to tell. Again, once these compounds get into water, they're very fast moving when they're in the water. So no, likely some sort of industrial, contamination from the past. That's best I could tell you.
Do we have a requirement to test anything out of the lakes, or would the town have that requirement? Because that, does affect aquifers for us.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that's not anything I've been doing any research on. The one thing that I will tell you was kind of eye-opening to me. So you see the regulations that are in front of us, and through this process, I did a lot of research and reading, and I learned drinking water, bottled drinking water, is not regulated for PFAS. They tested multiple brands, and certain ones had higher levels of PFAS in them.
Drink up, guys.
And the other thing, I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, because the other thing about this is guess what? If we have it in our drinking water, where's that water going? That's going into the sanitary sewer. So I know what's coming right behind this, and it's going to be discharge limits for the wastewater plant. But it all hinges, right now we're at that stage where we just really should educate the ratepayers, the community. We're not to the point where we have to turn that well off. It really is going to come down to what those final limits that are set, where those come in at.
Jason, as far as it goes when they're testing, and if they're going to watch what we're expelling at the wastewater plant, then I would think you would be able to conversely look and say, here, this is the water we're getting out of our well, and this is going through our system, and this is what's coming out.
I think I get what you're saying. I just don't know that always is the way it goes. I mean, that may make sense, but I don't know that that's always how regulations come into play.
I understand. I would then ask the DNR, say, well, tell us what we can do then.
And in this case, it's really not DNR, it's EPA. So DNR has set their, for the state of Wisconsin, has set their maximum containment level, which is actually higher than the ones you're looking at. But EPA will subsede everybody. So what I really want to make sure is that I have the board support in sending out a letter. I think I'd like to see, develop the website to have some PFAS information on it and just get the word out about it. That's really what DNR's strongly recommends.
My opinion would be though that if we, yes, you definitely should get information out, but I think we should get it out if we put it online or whatever we do to make sure that we have enough information so people don't get extremely alarmed over something without having an explanation.
And I guess I think that's why it's important to get the facts out rather than, you know.
I would suggest that that letter include Jason's question, because that was the first question that came to mind, and I think we'll get those phone calls repeated. Or a filter I can put in at my home, that's gonna filter.
I was gonna suggest the same thing, that if we're putting the information out, we should have some source of information that tells everybody how to pull it out, yeah.
As best we can at this point, that's the asterisk there is.
No, I agree with you 100%. You don't have all the information.
Right.
But to Eileen's point, you're gonna get all those calls.
Understood.
You know, so then it's just gonna be, I don't know at this point. So everybody's gonna go drink bottles of water then.
Should I not be drinking my tap water from the village at this point?
That, absolutely, it is 100% safe.
All right. Yeah, look, letter out, right? I mean, that's a consensus. All right, moving on, discussion regarding possible contracted service for code enforcement services.
So as you know, we have not had a code enforcement officer. As you know, we haven't had a code enforcement officer since June. I'm guessing she called Scott in July?
Yes.
So.
Yeah,
and
she gave me a call and I just turned it on.
Yeah, and he just kind of told her to contact me, and I sat down with her in August. We discussed what services she offers. Obviously, they offer, if you look at the sample contracts she sent over, they offer some services that do not pertain to the village. Landlord license rental inspection program, short-term rental, that liquor license program, that kind of thing we don't need. But pretty much does everything that our code enforcement officer was doing. So I guess I'm just bringing this up for discussion if this is something we want to consider, or if we want to keep it in-house and I should advertise to fill that position. Yes, she does a lot of communities in Walworth County, as you can see. I did reach out to those chiefs, and I put a couple of their comments in it. Looks like they're very happy with her, and then some of the chiefs that got back to me just, pretty much said what that chief said, because I sent it out by email, and almost everyone replied, but the last few that replied said ditto what the other chief said before me. As you see, the cost is going to be $50 an hour, plus any office supplies that they use. Figured out it'd be about an extra $100 a week compared to what we were paying. So, plus office supplies, whatever they use for envelopes, postage, and up for discussion. I know I talked to Matt earlier today because he had a couple questions. There's some things that we need to put in this contract regarding how they respond to me and what information, if I request it from them, how many days. In case we get the open records request for something, how long I can fulfill the open records request. I'm going to try to come up with how she's going to fill me in. I think 10 hours to start out with and see
How many code enforcement officers have been here within the 7 years, I think that's been in place?
4.
4 different individuals in 7 years.
To me, it's a no-brainer. You don't have to worry about staff, benefits, insurance,
Well, they weren't,
sick time.
it was a part-time job, so there was no benefits.
I will say too, that I think it's, over we saw was the part-time, people shifting.
And I think, 3 of them that left here all went full-time.
Our discussion has been, how do we find a way to, if we did have it in-house yet, fit that as a full-time position, not maybe as code enforcement, but maybe that can help Jason or Eileen in some capacity. But then that's difficult, because when are they doing that? When are they helping you out with code enforcement?
Plus, I think we discussed that between the 3 of us, and budget's just not kind of hard.
So I think, to the conversation you and I had this afternoon, I think this is a great idea, and for exactly all the things that we're saying, but this individual or this LLC, they work well in code enforcement. It sounds like that they do other municipal-related type things. Maybe there are some of commoditized things that some of our staff are doing that then we can offload to this individual to then free up for that time that you were talking about. So it sounded like there were some other options there.
There are, I guess, but we have to figure out adding hours to their.
Right, I would start with yours. I don't wanna like go all in and go,
Right.
it doesn't work out, and then we're scrambling to pull it all back. But fill yours. Do we like it? Do we not like it? What do we think? And let's take a look. Well, okay, do we wanna buy more or do we not? We can.
Then I will start, I'll contact Allison, we'll sit down, we'll go through some other things for the contract. Obviously, I'll run it by attorney before I bring it back. Final approval. Or January 1st. A year and see how.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, ordinances and resolutions. Resolution 22-12, recommendation from Planning Commission to approve authorizing the release of highway setbacks, restrictions affecting vacant parcels immediately west 2526 Main Street on south side of Highway 20.
Make a motion to approve resolution 2022-12.
Second?
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Ordinance 2022-11, recommendations from Planning Commission to approve text amendments to the Honey Creek Plan Development District. Toronto Builders applicant, application 2022-29.
Motion to approve ordinance 2022-11.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Booth Lake minutes, from 7:20 or the special meeting from 7:28. Any questions? How about for emergency services? Let's go for all of them right away. 7:12, 8:16, 8:23, or 9:1.
Did make a motion not to have as many meetings in 1 month. That will continue.
I assume, from the report on July 12th, that, the engine has been in service. I assume that's the new one that they received.
Correct. And we haven't yet sold the old. Okay.
But the August financial report, we actually have Kathy here if you have any questions about it.
fantastic job. I have no questions.
All right, how about Park and Rec minutes from 7/11? Library Board minutes from 8/9. Planning Commission minutes from 9/12. Questions about the Highway 120, 2023 resurfacing update?
Okay, Howard, I guess, when is this gonna actually be done?
The closure is, I think it was July to November,
23.
2023, sorry.
So we're gonna have both roads from 43.
Yep, and I'm told both project managers are working together. I brought that up too. I'm a little hesitant to bring it up anymore, just because of, I don't wanna risk the Highway 20 project, which I felt like at first they were looking for that reason, because that's what they came to me with and said, you know, these detours, and, because we had brought that up early on, but I hesitate to talk about that anymore. The two detours really shouldn't impact each other, and interestingly, what I did learn today is there's going to be a third detour in the mix. Highway 83 will be closed next construction season from like spring to July. And the detour is going to be Highway 20 into the village to Highway ES north. Which, remember, our Highway 20 project within the village is gonna be broken down into 2 years. From the intersection to the west is gonna be next year. That'll be a full closure. And then 24 includes the intersection to the east. That's in 24. It will be a couple of years of orange barrels.
Like Bowers Road's gonna be busy.
Or you have to get off in Waukesha to come home.
I'm just thinking too, with this, people come down that, especially in the summer, when they're coming into concerts at Alpine Valley and the Bowers Road comment.
And that's what they're planning. So they're planning a specific detour for the Alpine traffic, and it is Bowers Road, like you mentioned.
All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 1985 1E for the purpose of conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Police union contract, cell tower lease, development agreement for TID 4.
Second.
President Seeger,
Yes.
Trustee Alexander,
Yes.
Trustee Johnson,
Yes.
Trustee Nugent, Trustee Renucci,
Yes.
Trustee Smalley,
Yes.
Trustee Wisniewski.
Yes.